In the sterile corridors of the Hart Senate office building, a data ethics officer was about to expose the truth that could destroy her career. What started as routine congressional testimony took a shocking turn when she received a termination email live on national television. Lena Ortiz wasn't your typical corporate whistleblower. For 2 years, she had spent her life buried in healthcare algorithms at Helixion Corporation, known for her meticulous attention to patient outcomes data that others preferred to ignore. When she encountered Senator Cross's penetrating questions about Medicaid fraud, she had no idea she was walking into a corporate trap designed to silence her forever. Ortiz made a split-second decision that would lead to federal indictments, a healthcare revolution, and the collapse of a trillion-dollar empire. What began as careful, scripted answers would become an explosive revelation of systematic patient discrimination. The healthcare industry would never be the same after one woman chose truth over safety, patience over profit, and justice over job security. The moment Max Calder hit send on that termination email, he thought he was cutting her loose. He had no idea he was setting her free. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The apartment was too quiet. That's what I noticed first, as I spread the files across my kitchen table at 11:47 p.m., the city lights of Alexandria bleeding through my blinds in thin gold strips. Tomorrow I would sit in front of Congress and lie, or tell the truth. I wasn't sure which would destroy me faster. The subpoena had arrived 3 weeks ago, formal and cold, bearing the seal of the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor and Pensions. Miss Lena Ortiz, Senior Data Ethics Officer, Helixion Corp. You are hereby commanded to appear, as if I had a choice, as if I hadn't been trying to get someone to listen for 2 years. I picked up the first file, patient ID 47291. Maria Santos, 34, diabetes, 3 children. The algorithm had flagged her as high utilization risk and recommended care restriction. What the algorithm didn't know, what it was never designed to care about, was that Maria worked 2 jobs and could only get to appointments on weekends. The model read her missed weekday slots as non-compliance. The restriction held. Maria's insulin coverage was cut by 40%. She went into diabetic ketoacidosis 6 weeks later. My hands trembled slightly as I set the file down. Not from nerves, from rage that had been building so slowly I'd almost forgotten it was there. I'd flagged Maria's case in my quarterly ethics report, sent it up the chain with 14 others just like it. The response came back in corporate speak. Thank you for your diligence. We'll review these edge cases in the next algorithm refinement cycle. There was no next cycle. There never was. I reached for my phone and scrolled to the contact marked simply, Mom. Isabel Ortiz had raised me to believe that hard work and honesty were enough, that if you did your job well, if you spoke truth to power, the system would protect you. At 43, I was old enough to know better, but her voice still anchored me. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Maija. It's almost midnight. I know, Ma. I stopped, looking at the scattered files. How do you tell your mother that the company paying your salary is killing people? That you've become complicit just by staying quiet? I have that hearing tomorrow. The one in Washington. Her voice sharpened with worry. Lena, you be careful what you say. These big companies, they don't forgive. I know. You sure you have to do this? Maybe they just want you to confirm some paperwork, something small. I almost laughed. If only it were that simple. It's not small, Ma. A pause. Then, softer. You wouldn't be my daughter if you didn't do what's right. But you also wouldn't be my daughter if I didn't worry. After we hung up, I returned to the files. The pattern was everywhere, once you knew how to look for it. Helixion's Medicaid optimization algorithm wasn't just making mistakes. It was making profitable ones. Expensive patients were systematically flagged for care restriction. Chronic conditions were reclassified as lifestyle choices. Specialists were marked as unnecessary for patients in certain zip codes. The genius was in the deniability. Each decision looked defensible in isolation. It was only when you aggregated the data, when you looked at the outcomes by race and income and geographic region, that the truth emerged. The algorithm wasn't optimizing for health, it was optimizing for profit. I'd tried to raise this 18 months ago, then 12 months ago, then 6. Each time, the response was the same polite deflection. Dr. Ortiz, we appreciate your diligence, but you may be seeing patterns that aren't there. Trust the peer review process. The peer review process was 3 guys in suits who hadn't looked at raw data in years. At 12:23 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, then silence, then the soft whisper of paper sliding under my door. I waited 30 seconds before checking. An unmarked manila envelope, my name written in block letters across the front. Inside, a photocopy of my original memo from 14 months ago, the one flagging algorithmic bias in the Medicaid contracts, the one that had mysteriously vanished from internal servers 3 weeks later. A yellow sticky note was attached to the top corner. They deleted this from internal logs. They think you can't prove what you said. You can. Speak now. I stared at the memo. My own words, my own analysis, my own signature, proof that I'd seen this coming, proof that I'd tried to stop it, proof that they'd buried it. Whoever had slipped this under my door was taking a massive risk. Someone inside Helixion still had a conscience. Someone else was tired of the silence. I folded the memo carefully and slipped it into my briefcase alongside the files I was authorized to bring. Tomorrow, Senator Cross would ask me about discrepancies in Helixion's Medicaid report. I was supposed to give measured, careful answers. I was supposed to protect the company while appearing to cooperate. But Maria Santos had 3 children, and somewhere in those files were dozens of other Maria Santos, people whose lives had been reduced to data points, whose health had been sacrificed to shareholder value. I finished packing my briefcase at 1:15 a.m. The hearing was at 10, 6 hours of sleep if I was lucky, but I knew I wouldn't sleep. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had the courage to tell the truth that no one wanted to hear. The pattern was clear now. The only question was whether I'd have the strength to break it. The Hart Senate office building felt like a marble tomb. I sat in the witness waiting room at 9:42 a.m., watching other hearings cycle through the monitors mounted to the walls, corporate executives in expensive suits giving careful non-answers, politicians performing outrage for the camera, the machinery of accountability grinding forward without ever quite reaching truth. Miss Ortiz, I looked up to see Max Calder approaching, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile warm and entirely artificial. Helixion's general counsel had flown down from New York just to make sure I stayed on script. Max, I kept my voice neutral. He settled into the chair beside me, close enough that his cologne, something expensive and aggressive, made my eyes water. Nervous? Should I be? Of course not. This is routine oversight. Senators asking questions they already know the answers to. You just stick to the talking points we reviewed, and everyone goes home happy. He leaned back, checking his Rolex. 20 minutes until showtime. I thought about the memo hidden in my briefcase, the deleted file, the anonymous warning. What if they ask about the algorithmic bias reports? What reports? His voice was light, but his eyes sharpened. I'm not aware of any formal bias reports. Of course he wasn't. That was the beauty of corporate memory law. Inconvenient documents simply ceased to exist. Right. No reports. Exactly. He stood, smoothing his tie. I'll be watching from the gallery. Just remember you're here to reassure them that Helixion takes data ethics seriously. Nothing more dramatic than that. After he left, I checked my phone. A text from Asha Brennan, my former intern who was now a junior analyst. They locked down all your system access this morning, officially for security during testimony. Thought you should know. My stomach dropped. They were cutting me off in real time. Whatever happened today, I wouldn't be going back to my office, wouldn't be able to access my files, wouldn't be able to do anything but watch from the outside as they rewrote history. Miss Ortiz, a young staffer appeared. The committee is ready for you. The hearing room was smaller than I'd expected but packed with cameras. Senator Lena Cross sat at the center of the raised dais, her silver hair pulled back severely, her dark eyes already focused on me with laser intensity. I'd researched her background, former prosecutor, lost her brother to a diabetes complication that might have been prevented with better care coordination. She had personal reasons to care about healthcare algorithms. I was sworn in with my right hand raised, my left hand on a Bible that felt heavier than it should. Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. The first 20 minutes went exactly as Max had planned. Softball questions from friendly senators, careful answers about Helixion's commitment to ethical data practices. I spoke about our review processes, our commitment to equity, our ongoing efforts to improve algorithmic fairness. All true, in the narrowest possible sense, all meaningless. Then Senator Cross leaned forward. Ms. Ortiz, I'm looking at Helixion's Medicaid optimization reports from the past 18 months. Your company claims to have improved care efficiency by 23%, while reducing costs by 31%. That's remarkable. We're proud of those outcomes, Senator. I'm sure you are. But I'm curious about the methodology. When you say, improved efficiency, what exactly does that mean? This was where I was supposed to deflect. Talk about data privacy, reference proprietary algorithms, suggest that the technical details were beyond the scope of a public hearing. Instead, I felt my smartwatch buzz against my wrist, a notification from my corporate email. I glanced down reflexively. Subject: employment termination. Effective immediately. My blood went cold. They were firing me, right now. While I sat under oath in front of Congress and a dozen cameras, I looked up to see Max Calder in the gallery, his phone in his hand, his expression carefully neutral. He'd sent the email during my testimony, a power play, a message, stay quiet, or this gets worse. Something shifted inside me, a gear clicking into place. The fear that had been holding me back for 2 years suddenly lifted, replaced by something clearer and infinitely more dangerous. Senator Cross, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. When Helixion says improved efficiency, what we mean is that we've successfully reduced the number of expensive patients who receive care. The room went dead silent. I'm sorry. Could you clarify that? Our algorithm is designed to identify high-cost patients and recommend care restrictions. The efficiency gains come from denying services to people who need them most. The cost savings come from people who can't afford to fight the system. Senator Cross sat back. The cameras swiveled. I could hear whispers from the gallery, but I couldn't see Max anymore. I didn't need to. He'd played his hand, and now I was playing mine. Miss Ortiz, are you testifying under oath that Helixion deliberately restricts care to vulnerable patients? I opened my briefcase and pulled out the files, the real files. The deleted memo. Patient ID 4291. Senator, I have documentation of 827 cases where Helixion's algorithm recommended care restrictions that resulted in preventable hospitalizations. Diabetic patients denied insulin coverage. Cancer patients denied specialist referrals. Children denied mental health services. The room erupted. Senators talking over each other. Staff rushing between desks. Camera flashes popping like small explosions. Senator Cross's voice cut through the noise. Order. Miss Ortiz, I want to be very clear. Are you alleging that a $890 million federal contract was being used to systematically deny care to Medicaid patients? I thought about Maria Santos. About her 3 children. About the dozens of other families buried in my files. About the anonymous note that had given me back my own words. Senator, I'm not alleging anything. I'm providing evidence. The algorithm isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, and people are dying because of it. The hearing devolved into chaos after that. Senators demanding answers. Lawyers rushing to huddle. Max Calder nowhere to be seen, but I sat calmly at the witness table, my hands folded, watching the truth finally spill into the light. 24 months of silence, broken in 24 minutes. They'd tried to fire me into submission. Instead, they'd fired me into freedom. The parking garage beneath my apartment building had never felt so much like a bunker. I sat in my Honda Civic for 20 minutes after the hearing, watching news alerts pile up on my phone like digital snow. Helixion stock plummets. After congressional bombshell, whistleblower alleges $890 million Medicaid fraud. Healthcare giant faces federal investigation. My name was everywhere. Photos of me at the witness table, looking serious and slightly shell-shocked. Video clips of my voice saying words I'd never planned to speak. People are dying because of it. The elevator ride to my floor felt endless. When the doors opened, I half expected to find federal agents, or corporate lawyers, or camera crews. Instead, the hallway was empty except for Mrs. Patterson from 4B, checking her mail. She looked up as I passed, and I saw recognition flicker across her face. "You're that woman from the news, the one who—" "Excuse me," I said, fumbling with my keys. "I need to—" My apartment door swung open before I could finish unlocking it. I stepped inside and immediately felt the wrongness. Nothing was moved. Nothing was missing. But the air felt different. Searched violated. Then I saw the note on my kitchen counter. Block letters. Same handwriting as the anonymous envelope from last night. "They were here an hour ago. I got what you need. Coffee shop on King Street at 8 p.m. Come alone. I can't. Asha Brennan, my former intern, the one who'd warned me about the system lockout. Smart enough to anticipate corporate retaliation. Brave enough to do something about it. My phone buzzed. Text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Ortiz. This is Noah Reyes from The Atlantic. I'd like to speak with you about your testimony today. I believe there's more to this story." Another buzz, this time a call from a number with a 2020. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. Then another. By 4 p.m. I'd received 17 interview requests. 3 book deal inquiries and 1 marriage proposal. From someone in Montana who thought I was a true American hero. I wasn't a hero. I was a woman who'd run out of ways to stay quiet. At 7:45 p.m. I walked into Misha's Coffee on King Street. A cramped space that smelled like espresso and rain. Aisha sat in the back corner, her laptop open, looking like any other grad student except for the USB drive she was nervously rotating between her fingers. "Lena." She stood as I approached, and I was surprised when she hugged me. "Are you okay? That was God, that was incredible. That was career suicide. Maybe, or maybe it was the most important thing you'll ever do." She gestured to the chair across from her. "They think they erased everything. Your access, your files, your reports, but they forgot about the backup servers for the ethics review database." She slid the USB drive across the table. "Everything's on here, not just the reports they deleted, but the original source code for the Medicaid algorithm, the training data they used, the bias tests they never ran, and the emails." "What emails?" "Between Calder and the development team, discussing how to optimize outcomes for the federal contract, how to make the restrictions look like evidence-based care." Her voice dropped. "Lena. They knew from the beginning. They knew exactly what they were building." I stared at the drive. Such a small thing to hold so much weight. "Why are you doing this? You could lose your job." "I already lost my job. They fired half the ethics department 2 hours after your testimony. Restructuring for efficiency, they called it." She laughed bitterly. "Besides, you taught me something. You said good data tells stories that need to be heard. This story needs to be heard." We sat in silence for a moment. 2 women who'd learned the hard way that corporations have no conscience. Only calculations. "There's something else," Aisha said. "Tariq Halim reached out to me, the former head of predictive analytics. He wants to talk to you. Says he has information about how they built the algorithm in the first place." Tariq, I remembered him from meetings 3 years ago, before he'd quietly disappeared from the company. Brilliant. Soft-spoken. The kind of engineer who actually cared about the humans behind the data point. If Tariq was ready to talk, it meant the facade was truly cracking. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. "Miss Ortiz, this is Senator Cross's office. The senator would like to schedule a follow-up meeting. She's also been contacted by the Department of Justice. They're interested in speaking with you about potential federal charges." Federal charges, the weight of it. hit me like cold water. This wasn't just corporate embarrassment anymore. People were going to prison. "I'll call you back," I said, hanging up. Aisha was watching me carefully. "You okay?" I thought about Maria Santos again, about her 3 children, about the insulin coverage that was cut, about the hospitalization that could have been prevented, about all the other Maria Santoses buried in my files, reduced to data points, sacrificed to profit margin. "Yeah," I said, pocketing the USB drive. "I think I am." Outside, Alexandria glittered in the darkness. The same city I'd lived in for 8 years, but everything felt different now. The streetlights seemed brighter, the air seemed clearer. I'd spent 2 years carrying the weight of what I knew, and now that weight was shared, distributed, no longer mine alone to bear. My phone rang again. Noah Reyes from the Atlantic. Still trying to reach me, this time. I answered. "Mr. Reyes? This is Lena Ortiz. You said you wanted to hear the whole story." "I do." "Then let's talk, but not over the phone, and not about what happened today. I want to tell you about what's been happening for the past 2 years, the story they tried to erase." "When?" "Tomorrow. I have some people you need to meet, because this wasn't just my story anymore. It was Asha's story, and Tariq's story, and Maria Santos's story. It was the story of everyone who'd been reduced to an algorithm, everyone who'd been denied care in the name of efficiency, everyone who'd been told that their lives were too expensive to save. They'd fired me to shut me up. Instead, they'd freed me to speak truth without fear. The reckoning was just beginning. The coffee shop in Georgetown was the kind of place where conspiracy theories went to die too bright, too public, too full of law students, and think tank interns to hide anything genuinely dangerous, which made it perfect for what Tariq Halim had to tell me. He looked older than I remembered, his dark hair now streaked with premature gray, his eyes carrying the weight of someone who'd been keeping secrets too long. When I slid into the booth across from him at 2 p.m., he was already halfway through what looked like his 3rd espresso. "Lena." He didn't smile. "I watched your testimony yesterday. Took them long enough to fire you. I knew they'd try to destroy you the moment you became a threat. Question was whether you'd let them." He pulled out a laptop, old and battered, the kind engineers kept for personal projects. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone with the courage to speak up, someone with access to the outcomes data." Screen flickered to life, revealing lines of code that meant nothing to me but clearly meant everything to him. "This is the original Medicaid optimization algorithm. Version 1. Before the executive modifications." Executive modification. The algorithm I built was designed to identify patients who needed additional support. Complex cases, chronic conditions, people who'd benefit from care coordination. His fingers moved across the keyboard, highlighting sections of code. It was supposed to flag vulnerable patients for increased attention, not decreased coverage. I stared at the screen. What happened? Max Calder happened. 6 months into development, he brought in a consulting firm from Delaware. Experts in outcome optimization, they called themselves. They took my code and inverted it. He opened another window, showing a side-by-side comparison. "See this conditional statement? In my version, a high-risk score triggered enhanced care protocols. In their version, it triggers restriction protocols." The coffee in my stomach turned bitter. They flipped it. Completely. Patients who needed the most help became patients who received the least. And because the underlying logic was sound, my risk assessments were accurate. It looked like evidence-based medicine. The algorithm correctly identified people who would be expensive to treat. The modification just changed what happened to them. I thought about the files in my briefcase, the pattern I'd seen but couldn't quite name. How many people knew about the inversion? Maybe 6 people. The consulting firm, Calder, and 3 executives who've since moved on to other companies. He closed the laptop. I tried to raise concerns during testing. Kept asking why our outcomes metrics looked wrong. Got told it was a reporting issue, that the numbers would normalize in production, but they didn't. They got worse, because the system was working exactly as designed. Just not as I'd designed it. He leaned back, running his hands through his hair. Do you know what it's like to see your life's work turned into a weapon? I didn't answer, because I was beginning to understand something larger. Tariq, do you still have access to the source code? The original version? Some of it. Why? Because Asha saved the training data and the bias report. If we can show that your original algorithm would have produced different outcomes, we can prove they knew the system was harming people. He was already reaching for his phone. Lena, there's something else. The offshore data processing. Those weren't just cost-cutting measures. What do you mean? Helixion was routing sensitive processing through shell companies in Ireland and the Cayman Islands, not for tax purposes, for liability protection. If anyone sued over wrongful denials, the actual decision-making algorithms were technically operated by foreign entities with no U.S. assets. The pieces were clicking together now. A systematic plan to deny care, obscure responsibility and profit from the different, not corporate negligence, corporate malice. My phone buzzed. Text from Asha. Just got word that they're purging all servers tonight. Whatever you need from the system, we need it now. I showed Tariq the message. He swore softly in what sounded like Urdu. We need to move fast, I said. Can you reconstruct your original algorithm? If I have 12 hours and access to the training data. Yes, Asha can get you the data, but we need somewhere secure to work. He smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. I know. 3 hours later, I found myself in the basement of a townhouse in DuPont Circle, surrounded by the humming servers and blinking lights of what Tariq called his digital workshop. Asha had arrived with a duffel bag full of hard drives and external storage devices. Apparently, she'd been quietly backing up Helixion's ethics database for months. You've been planning this, I said, watching her set up workstations with military precision. I've been hoping for this, she corrected. There's a difference. Tariq was already deep in code, his fingers flying across multiple keyboards as he reconstructed the algorithm from memory and fragments. Lena, I need you to run the outcomes analysis. Compare what actually happened to patients versus what would have happened under my original model. The work was meticulous and heartbreaking. Patient after patient, case after case. The pattern emerged with mathematical clarity. The modified algorithm hadn't just denied care. It had targeted the most vulnerable populations with surgical precision. Low-income zip codes, minority communities, patients with chronic conditions that required expensive long-term management. Look at this, Asha said, pointing to a scatter plot on her screen. The correlation between denial rates and median income is almost perfect. R squared of V. Meaning 4. It's not a correlation, Tariq said grimly. It's a feature. The algorithm was trained to identify and eliminate high-cost patients. Income was just the most reliable predictor. By 9 p.m. we had it. A complete comparison showing that Tariq's original algorithm would have approved 73% of the cases that were ultimately denied. More importantly, we had the smoking gun email threads between the consulting firm and Helixion executives, explicitly discussing how to optimize outcomes for stakeholder value, while maintaining plausible medical justification. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but exhilarated. This is it. This proves everything. This proves intent, Tariq corrected. But proving intent and proving it in court are different things. My phone rang. Noah Reyes from The Atlantic. Lena, I've been working on the story, but I need to ask you something. Are you prepared for what comes next? Because once this goes public, there's no going back. I looked around the basement, at Asha, organizing evidence files, at Tariq double-checking his code, at the screens full of data that told the story of a systematic betrayal of public trust. Noah, there's something you need to understand. This isn't just about one company or one algorithm. This is about what happens when we treat healthcare like a profit center instead of a human right. When we let machines make moral decisions. Can you prove that? And we're going to give you everything. Because Maria Santos deserved better than corporate spin. Because the families buried in our data deserved to know why their loved ones had been abandoned. because sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to expose exactly how broken it really is. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They'd built their algorithm on lies, we were going to bury them with truth. The article went live at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I knew because my phone started buzzing at 6:03 and didn't stop for the next 14 hours. The algorithm of denial, how a healthcare giant used AI to systematically reject care for America's most vulnerable patients. Noah had written 4,000 words of surgical precision, laying out the case with the methodical brutality of a prosecutor's closing argument. The original algorithm versus the modified version, the offshore data laundering, the emails discussing stakeholder optimization, and threading through it all, the human cost, Maria Santos and dozens of others, their stories told with the dignity they'd been denied in life. My name was everywhere, not just as a source, but as the protagonist of a story that felt larger than anything I'd imagined. Lena Ortiz, the data ethics officer who brought down a healthcare giant, the whistleblower who chose patients over profits, the woman who said no to $890 million in fraud. By 8 a.m., Helixion's stock had dropped 30%. By noon it was in free fall. I sat in my apartment, watching the news coverage with a mixture of vindication and terror. CNN had picked up the story, MSNBC was running segments every hour. Fox News was somehow making it about government overreach, but even they couldn't argue with the data. "This is Lena Ortiz," the anchor was saying, showing a photo of me from the congressional hearing. The former Helixion employee, whose testimony has sparked what may be the largest healthcare fraud investigation in decades. Former employee, it still stung, even though I'd chosen this path. My phone rang, unknown number, but I was learning to answer everything. "Miss Ortiz, this is David Kim from the Department of Justice, Healthcare Fraud Division. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss your testimony and any additional evidence you might have." Additional evidence. I looked at the stack of files on my coffee table, the USB drives from Ashad and Tariq, the reconstructed algorithm that proved intent. "I have quite a bit of additional evidence, Mr. Kim." "Good. Can you be in DC tomorrow? We're moving quickly on this." After he hung up, I realized I was shaking, not from fear, from relief. For 2 years I'd been a voice in the wilderness. Now I had the full weight of federal law enforcement behind me. The doorbell rang at 2 p.m. I looked through the peephole to see a woman about my age, holding a bouquet of flowers and wearing a t-shirt that read, "Healthcare Justice Now." "Miss Ortiz, I'm Jennifer Castillo. I wanted to thank you." I opened the door cautiously. "Thank me?" "My mother was denied coverage for her cancer treatments 3 years ago. The insurance company said the algorithm showed she was low priority for expensive interventions." Her voice caught. "She died 6 months later. We never understood why they wouldn't approve the care her doctors recommended. Until today." The flowers were daisies, simple and bright. I took them with hands that felt unsteady. "I'm sorry about your mother." "Don't be sorry. Be proud. You gave us answers, you gave us justice." She paused. "There are more of us, you know. Families who lost people because of these algorithms. We're organizing." After she left, I stood in my doorway holding the flowers, watching cars slow down as they passed my building. Some people pointed, some took pictures, a few honked their horns in what I hoped was support. My phone buzzed, text from my mother. "Mija, I'm watching the news. I'm scared for you, but I'm proud of you. Come home this weekend. I'll make your favorite." Another text. This one from Asha. Check Twitter. "Lena Ortiz truth is trending." I'd avoided social media since the hearing, but curiosity got the better of me. The hashtag was filled with a mixture of support and vitriol. Hero and traitor in equal measure. Photos of my apartment building. Speculation about my motivations, my background, my personal life, but threading through the noise were other voices. Patients sharing their own stories of algorithmic denial. Healthcare workers talking about the pressure to prioritize profits over care. Data scientists questioning the ethics of their own work. Thank you for speaking up when the rest of us couldn't. You gave me the courage to report problems at my own company. My daughter is alive today because someone like you fought for her coverage. At 6 p.m. there was a knock at my door. I looked out to see Isabel Ortiz standing in my hallway, holding a suitcase and wearing the expression she'd worn when I was 8, and had gotten in trouble for fighting bullies at school. Equal parts worried and proud. Ma? What are you doing here? You think I'm going to let my daughter face this alone? She pushed past me into the apartment, taking in the scattered papers, the news coverage on my TV, the flowers from Jennifer Castillo. Have you eaten today? No, I don't think so. Of course you haven't. She was already moving toward my kitchen, claiming territory with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 40 years taking care of other people. Sit down. Let me make you something. I collapsed onto my couch, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had been carrying me for 3 days was finally wearing off, leaving behind the weight of what I'd done and what came next. Ma? They're going to come after me. Helixion, I mean. They have lawyers, money, influence. You're just my daughter, she said, appearing with a plate of leftover rice and beans that somehow materialized from my nearly empty refrigerator. And you're just a woman who told the truth when it mattered. That's not nothing, Misha. That's everything. She sat down beside me, her warm hand covering mine. Your father would be proud, you know. He always said the hardest thing in the world is doing right when everyone else is doing wrong. I thought about Papa, gone 5 years now, who'd worked construction his whole life, and never owned a suit but understood justice better than any lawyer I'd ever met. I'm scared, I admitted. Good. Being scared means you understand what you're up against. But look around you. She gestured to the TV, where my story was still the lead on the evening news. You're not alone anymore. She was right. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't alone. The truth was out, shared, and witnessed, and impossible to bury. Helixion could sue me, discredit me, try to destroy me, but they couldn't erase what the world now knew. Maria Santos's story had been told. Jennifer Castillo's mother had been remembered. The algorithm's lies had been exposed to daylight. Tomorrow I would meet with federal investigators. Tomorrow I would start building the case that would hold Helixion accountable. Tomorrow I would begin the long work of reform. But tonight, I sat with my mother, eating her rice and beans, watching my name scroll across the bottom of the screen, and finally understanding what courage felt like. It felt like coming home. The courier arrived at 7:23 a.m. on a Thursday, looking apologetic as he handed me an envelope thick enough to choke a horse. I signed for it with the resignation of someone who'd been expecting bad news for weeks. The letterhead was intimidating in that specifically legal way. Heavy paper, raised text, the kind of formatting designed to make you feel small before you even read the words. Kellerman, Price and Associates, attorneys at law. Below that, in smaller type, representing Helixion Corporation. The letter itself was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation, breach of confidentiality, theft of proprietary information, defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, each charge laid out with the precision of a surgeon's knife, each carrying potential damages that would bankrupt me 3 times over. They wanted $50 million in compensatory damages, plus punitive damages to be determined at trial. They wanted my computers seized, my files confiscated, my bank accounts frozen, pending litigation. They wanted me to publicly retract my statements and issue a formal apology for recklessly damaging Helixion's reputation through knowingly false allegations. I read it twice, standing in my kitchen in my pajamas, drinking coffee that had gone cold. Then I called the one lawyer I knew. Alan Ridgway had left Helixion 2 years before I did, citing irreconcilable differences with company direction. Translation: He'd gotten tired of being asked to write legal justifications for ethically indefensible practices. Now he ran a small firm specializing in employment law and whistleblower protection. Lena. Jesus. I was wondering when you'd call. I assume you got their love letter. $50 million, Alan. They want $50 million. They want you scared. There's a difference. I could hear him moving papers around. Can you be in my office in an hour, and bring everything: the lawsuit, your employment contract, any NDAs you signed, the whole file? His office was in a converted row house in downtown D.C., the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the overhead was low. Alan looked exactly like a lawyer who'd walked away from corporate money: rumpled suit, tired eyes, the slightly defiant air of someone who'd chosen principle over profit. Okay, he said, spreading the documents across his conference table. The good news is they're desperate. The bad news is desperate corporations with unlimited legal budgets can make your life hell even when they're wrong. How wrong are they? Very. Let's start with the confidentiality claim. You were a contractor, not a full employee, which means your NDA was limited to specifically enumerated proprietary information. Patient outcomes. Data. That's not proprietary. It's a matter of public health. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making notes. The defamation claim is even weaker. Truth is an absolute defense, and you have documentary evidence supporting every allegation. But here's the interesting part. They're not just suing you. What do you mean? They filed a separate motion to compel disclosure of your source. They want to know who gave you the deleted files, who helped you access the backup servers, who provided the original algorithm specifications. He looked up from his notes. They're fishing for other people to destroy. Asha. Tariq, the anonymous person who'd slipped the memo under my door. Helixion wasn't just coming after me. They were trying to unravel the entire network of people who'd made my testimony possible. Can they do that? They can try, but federal law protects whistleblower sources, especially in cases involving healthcare fraud. Which brings me to the really good news. He pulled out another document. I got a call this morning from David Kim at DOJ. They're not just investigating. They're preparing to file criminal charges, and they want to offer you immunity in exchange for cooperation. Immunity. The word hit me like a physical relief. What does that mean? It means the federal government believes your allegations and wants your help prosecuting Helixion. It also means their civil lawsuit just became a lot harder to pursue. My phone buzzed. Text from Noah Reyes. Follow-up story runs tomorrow. Helixion stock down 60% since original article. CEO resigned this morning. I showed Alan the message. He whistled softly. They're in full damage control mode. The lawsuit against you. It's not about winning. It's about controlling the narrative, making you look like a disgruntled employee instead of a legitimate whistleblower. So what do? We fight back, publicly. He was already reaching for his laptop. I'm going to draft a response that not only denies their claims but counters for harassment and abuse of process, and I'm going to make sure every reporter in DC gets a copy. The response letter took 3 hours to write, and was a thing of legal beauty. Alan dismantled Helixion's claims point by point, then went on the offensive. Their lawsuit was frivolous, designed to intimidate a legitimate whistleblower. Their allegations were contradicted by their own internal document. Their attempt to silence me was exactly the kind of corporate retaliation that federal law was designed to prevent. The best part was the ending. Ortiz looks forward to defending these baseless claims in court, where Helixion will be required to produce the very documents that prove the truth of her allegation. She also looks forward to the ongoing federal investigation, which will undoubtedly reveal the full scope of Helixion's fraudulent activities. You're not just defending, I said, reading over his shoulder. You're attacking. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. They want a public fight. Let's give them one. He hit send, copying Noah Reyes, Senator Cross's office, and 3 other reporters who'd been following the story. Within an hour, my phone was ringing with interview requests. I took the first call from a producer at CNN, then MSNBC. Then, each time I said the same thing. Helixion's lawsuit was an attempt to intimidate someone who'd exposed fraud that harmed vulnerable patients. I had evidence supporting every claim I'd made. I looked forward to presenting that evidence in court. By evening, the story had shifted. Instead of Helixion sues whistleblower, the headlines read, Healthcare giant tries to silence fraud witness, and lawsuit seen as retaliation against congressional testimony. My mother called from Phoenix, where she'd been watching the coverage at my aunt's house. Mija, they're talking about you on Univision. The anchor called you una guerrera de la justicia, a warrior for justice. I liked that better than whistleblower. Are you okay? She asked. All this legal business, it sounds scary. I'm okay, Ma. Better than okay, actually. For the first time in months, I feel like I'm fighting back instead of just defending. Good. Your father always said bullies only understand one language. Maybe it's time these corporate bullies learn to speak it. After we hung up, I stood at my window watching the city lights. Somewhere out there, Helixion's lawyers were probably working late, preparing their next move. Somewhere else, federal investigators were building a criminal case. And somewhere, patients were still being denied care by algorithms designed to prioritize profit over human life. But for the first time since this all began, I felt like I had backup. Legal backup, media backup, federal backup. I wasn't just one woman with a file folder anymore. I was part of something larger, a system of accountability that was finally slowly beginning to work. They'd tried to scare me into silence with their lawsuit. Instead, they'd given me a platform to speak even louder. Tomorrow, I would start building something new. Something that could prevent other companies from treating patients like line items in a spreadsheet. Something that could make the system work for people, instead of against them. But tonight, I was content to stand at my window, holding a cup of coffee that was still hot, reading the latest news alerts about Helixion's continuing collapse. Maria Santos deserved justice. Jennifer Castillo's mother deserved to be remembered. All the patients buried in my files deserved better than they'd received. They were going to get it. All of them. The fight was just beginning. The nonprofit incorporation papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, stamped and official and somehow more real than anything else that had happened in the past 3 months. Parity Ethics Foundation. The documents read, a 501c3 organization dedicated to promoting transparency, accountability, and human-centered design in healthcare technology. I spread the papers across the conference table in the shared workspace I'd rented in downtown Alexandria. 800 square feet of collaborative optimism, all glass walls and standing desks, and the kind of determined cheerfulness that comes from people who've decided to build something better instead of just complaining about what's broken. So we're really doing this, Asha said, looking at the documents with the expression of someone who'd just realized they'd jumped out of an airplane. We're really doing this. I confirmed. Tariq arrived carrying coffee and what looked like the blueprint for a small revolution. He'd spent the past month designing what he called ethical algorithm auditing protocols, systematic ways to test AI systems for bias, discrimination, and patient harm. The kind of tools that should have existed before Helixion ever deployed their Medicaid algorithm. The demand is incredible, he said, settling into a chair. I've had inquiries from 12 healthcare systems, 3 state Medicaid offices, and a consortium of patient advocacy groups. Everyone wants to know if their algorithms are doing what Helixion's did. Can we handle that kind of volume? Not yet. But we will. He pulled out his laptop, showing us a framework that looked like engineering precision meets moral philosophy. The beauty is that once we build the testing protocols, they're scalable. Any data scientist can run them. Any ethics officer can interpret the result. I thought about my old job at Helixion, the reports I'd written that nobody read, the warnings I'd raised that nobody heeded. What makes you think they'll listen to us when they didn't listen to people inside their own company? Because we have something they don't, Asha said, pulling up a news article on her phone. Credibility. The article was from Healthcare Finance News, federal contract pulled from Helixion following fraud investigation. Below that, a smaller headline, 3 states suspend AI-driven Medicaid determinations pending review. It's not just Helixion, Asha continued. The whole industry is spooked. CMS announced new algorithm transparency requirements for all Medicaid contracts. The FDA is considering mandatory bias testing for AI diagnostic tools. Everyone's scrambling to prove they're not the next healthcare AI scandal. My phone rang. Senator Cross's office. I'd been expecting the call. Ms. Ortiz, Senator Cross would like to invite you to join the newly formed Task Force on Algorithmic Accountability in Healthcare. The appointment would be unpaid, but it comes with significant platform opportunities to influence federal policy. A federal task force. 6 months ago, I'd been a middle manager filing reports that nobody read. Now I was being invited to help write the rules that would govern AI in healthcare across the entire country. I'd be honored, I said. After I hung up, the three of us sat in silence for a moment, looking at the incorporation papers and the frameworks and the news articles and the slowly growing pile of evidence that maybe, just maybe, we were actually going to change something. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out a folder I'd been carrying for weeks. Noah Reyes called this morning. The Atlantic wants to run a follow-up piece about what we're building here, but not just about us, about the whole movement. What movement? Tariq asked. This one. I opened the folder to reveal printouts of emails, LinkedIn messages and social media posts, data scientists leaving companies over ethical concerns, healthcare workers reporting algorithm bias, patients organizing to demand transparency in AI decision-making. It's happening everywhere. And it all traces back to that congressional hearing. Asha was reading over my shoulder. Look at this one. A pediatric oncologist in Seattle reporting that her hospital's AI system consistently under-prioritizes treatment for kids from low-income families. She cited your testimony as the reason she finally spoke up, and this, Tariq said, pointing to another message. A team at Johns Hopkins built their own algorithm auditing tool based on the protocols we published. They found bias in 3 different diagnostic systems. I thought about Maria Santos, about the ripple effects of her stories spreading outward like waves from a dropped stone. One woman's denied insulin coverage had become a congressional hearing, which had become a federal investigation, which had become a movement for algorithmic justice. We need a name for what we're doing, I said. Something that captures the mission. Algorithmic accountability, Asha suggested. Tech ethics, Tariq offered. No, I said, thinking about the families I'd met, the patients buried in my files, the human cost of reducing people to data points. We're not just auditing algorithms, we're fighting for dignity, for the idea that healthcare decisions should serve human flourishing, not corporate profits. I walked to the whiteboard and wrote, Digital Justice for Health Equity. That's what we're building, not just oversight, but justice. Not just transparency but equity. The idea that technology should make healthcare more fair, not less. Tariq nodded slowly. I like it. It's aspirational without being naive. And it's personal, Asha added. Justice isn't abstract, it's about specific people being treated fairly. My phone buzzed. Text message from David Kim at DOJ. Grand jury returned indictments this morning. Helixion CEO, GC, and 3 VPs charged with healthcare fraud and conspiracy. Thought you'd want to know. I showed them the message. Asha actually cheered. How long from your first internal report to federal indictments? Tariq asked. 2 years and 4 months. That might be a record for healthcare fraud prosecution. We spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Asha would lead the technical auditing team, building tools that could detect bias in real time. Tariq would focus on policy and standards, working with medical associations and regulatory bodies to establish ethical AI guidelines. I would handle partnerships and advocacy, connecting with patient groups and healthcare systems, ready to do the work. At 6 p.m., as we were packing up, Asha's laptop chimed with a new email. She read it, then looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. What is it? Funding inquiry. The Kresge Foundation wants to discuss a 3-year, $2.1 million grant to support algorithmic justice initiatives in healthcare. $2 million, enough to hire staff, build real tools, establish partnerships with academic medical centers, enough to move from scrappy startup to legitimate force for change. There's one condition, Asha continued reading. They want us to partner with existing patient advocacy organizations. They don't want to fund another group of tech people talking about healthcare. They want to fund healthcare communities using tech for justice. I thought about Jennifer Castillo, the woman who'd brought me flowers after the Atlantic article, about the families organizing to demand answers about algorithmic bias, about the patients who'd been reduced to risk scores and profit margins. Perfect, I said. That's exactly what we should be, because this was never really about algorithms or auditing protocols or federal task forces. It was about Maria Santos and her 3 children. It was about Jennifer Castillo's mother and the cancer treatment she'd been denied. It was about every person who'd been told by a machine that their life wasn't worth the cost of care. We were building something to heal the damage that had been done, but more than that, we were building something to prevent it from happening again. The papers on the conference table said, Parity Ethics Foundation, but what we were really building was hope. Systematic, scalable, evidence-based hope, and for the first time in 2 years, that felt like enough to start with. The makeup artist was younger than my own reflection, all gentle efficiency and professional sympathy as she worked to make me look like someone who belonged on national television. We were in a small room behind the Senate hearing chamber, cramped and fluorescent lit, filled with the nervous energy of people about to step into history. Try not to touch your face once we're done, she said, applying a final layer of powder. The lights are hot, but this should hold. Through the doorway I could see the hearing room filling up, not the half-empty chamber of my first testimony 6 months ago, but a packed gallery with cameras from every major network. C-SPAN was carrying it live. Social media was already buzzing with algorithmic justice hashtag. This wasn't a routine oversight hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. Senator Cross appeared in the doorway, looking polished and determined in the way that suggested she'd been planning this moment for months. Lena, ready as anyone can be to testify about $80–90 million in fraud on live television, she smiled grimly. Today's not about Helixion. They're finished. The indictments took care of that. Today's about the future, about making sure this never happens again. We walked through the corridors of power, past portraits of senators I'd studied in high school civics class, past marble columns that had witnessed a century of American democracy stumbling toward justice. My footsteps echoed in the silence, each click of my heels marking the distance between the woman who'd sat at this same witness table 6 months ago, frightened, isolated, unsure, and the woman walking here now. The hearing room was blazing with light. As I took my seat at the witness table, I could see Noah Reyes in the press gallery, his recorder ready. Asha and Tariq sat in the public section, along with Jennifer Castillo and what looked like dozens of other families I didn't recognize but whose stories I somehow knew. The committee will come to order. Senator Cross's voice cut through the murmur of conversation. Today we hear testimony on the Algorithmic Accountability in Healthcare Act, landmark legislation that would establish mandatory bias testing, transparency requirements, and patient protection standards for all AI systems used in healthcare decisions. I looked down at my notes, then set them aside. I'd spent weeks preparing testimony about technical standards and regulatory frameworks, but sitting here, looking out at the families in the gallery, I realized that wasn't what this moment needed. Ortiz, Senator Cross began, you've become something of an expert on algorithmic bias in healthcare. Can you explain to the committee why federal oversight is necessary? I leaned toward the microphone, thinking about Maria Santos, about the insulin coverage that was denied, about the 3 children who lost their mother to a profit optimization algorithm. Senator, 6 months ago, I testified about a specific case of fraud at one company. But the problem isn't one company, it's an entire industry that's been allowed to treat patients like line items in a spreadsheet. I could see the cameras swiveling, the reporters leaning forward. This was the soundbite they'd come for. But I wasn't performing for them. I was speaking to the families in the gallery, to every person who'd been reduced to a risk score. In the past 6 months, our auditing protocols have identified algorithmic bias in healthcare systems across 12 states. Emergency room triage algorithms that systematically underprioritize Black patients. mental health screening tools that flag poverty as a mental illness indicator, prescription approval systems that deny pain medication to patients from certain zip codes. Senator Williams, the ranking Republican, interrupted. Ms. Ortiz, aren't you painting with rather a broad brush? These are complex technical systems designed by experts. Senator, I am an expert, and I'm telling you that these systems are working exactly as designed. They're just not designed for patient welfare. They're designed for cost containment, risk management, and profit optimization. I pulled out a folder, not my prepared testimony, but printouts of the cases we'd reviewed at Parity Ethics. Real patients, real harm, real families. This is James Crawford, 67, veteran diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. The VA's AI system recommended against specialist referral because his demographic profile suggested low treatment compliance. Mr. Crawford is a retired teacher with perfect medication adherence for 20 years. This is Angela Martinez, 34, single mother, chest pain in the emergency room. The triage algorithm rated her low priority because women her age rarely have heart attacks. She had a massive coronary an hour later in the waiting room. I set down the files and looked directly into the camera that I knew was broadcasting live. Senators, we're not talking about technical glitches. We're talking about systems that embed human prejudice into code and then hide behind mathematical objectivity. We're talking about discrimination with a digital signature. The room was completely silent now. Even the staff had stopped shuffling papers. The Algorithmic Accountability Act wouldn't just prevent another Helixion, it would establish the principle that healthcare AI must be transparent, audible, and accountable to the communities it serves. It would require that algorithms be tested for bias before deployment, monitored for discrimination during operation, and subject to appeal when they get it wrong. Senator Cross leaned forward. What would you say to critics who argue that regulation will stifle innovation in healthcare technology? I thought about Tariq's original algorithm, designed to identify patients who needed additional support, about the consulting firm that had inverted it to deny care instead, about the difference between innovation and optimization. Senator, real innovation in healthcare would be AI systems that reduce disparities instead of amplifying them, that connect patients to care instead of creating barriers, that serve human flourishing instead of corporate profit margin. I paused, looking out at the gallery. The technology isn't the problem. The question is who controls it and what values guide its design. The hearing continued for 2 more hours, with testimony from patient advocates, technology experts, and healthcare administrators. But I knew the moment that would make the evening news, the quote that would trend on social media, the line that would be remembered. Healthcare decisions should never be made by algorithms that patients can't understand, challenge, or appeal. Afterward, in the corridor outside the hearing room, Jennifer Castillo found me in the crowd of reporters and lobbyists. Thank you, she said simply. For my mother. For all of us. I looked around at the families gathered in the hallway, people who'd traveled from across the country to witness this moment, to see their pain transformed into policy, their loss channeled into change. Thank you for being here, for making sure they remember that data points are people. Noah Reyes approached with his recorder. Lena, how does it feel to go from corporate whistleblower to policy architect in 6 months? I thought about the question, about the journey from my quiet apartment in Alexandria to this marble hallway, from filing ignored reports to drafting federal legislation. It feels like the beginning, like we've proven that change is possible, and now we have to do the harder work of making it sustainable. Because the hearing was just theater. The real work happened in the congressional offices, where staffers would spend the next months negotiating language, in the regulatory agencies that would write implementation guidelines, in the healthcare systems that would voluntarily adopt higher standards before being required to, in the communities of patients and families and advocates who would hold everyone accountable. The lights were hot, just as the makeup artist had warned. But I wasn't sweating from the temperature. I was sweating from the weight of possibility, from the realization that 6 months after being fired for telling the truth, I was helping to write the rules that would govern healthcare AI for decades to come. Maria Santos would never get her insulin coverage back. Jennifer Castillo's mother would never receive the cancer treatment she'd been denied. But maybe, we could build a system where the next Maria Santos, the next grieving daughter, wouldn't have to fight an algorithm for the right to heal. That felt like enough. That felt like everything. The email arrived on a Thursday morning in late April, tucked between spam about conference calls and a newsletter I'd forgotten I'd subscribed to. The sender communications @helixion.com, the subject line, moving forward together. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it, coffee growing cold in my hand, spring rain tapping against the windows of our new office space. Parity Ethics had moved into a converted warehouse in Shaw, all exposed brick and collaborative energy, the kind of space where social impact organizations go to dream big and iterate fast. Dear Lena Ortiz, as Helixion begins a new chapter under interim leadership, we want to acknowledge the important conversations your advocacy has sparked about algorithmic transparency in healthcare. While we maintain that previous management decisions were made in good faith, we recognize the value of ongoing dialogue about best practices in healthcare AI. We would welcome the opportunity to discuss how Helixion and Parity Ethics might collaborate on industry-leading standards for algorithmic accountability. Our new Chief Ethics Officer, Dr. Patricia Hollings, would be pleased to arrange a call at your convenience. We believe there is significant common ground between our organization's shared commitment to patient-centered care. Sincerely, Marcus Webb, Director of Strategic Communications. I read it twice, then called Asha over. She was at her standing desk across the room, surrounded by 3 monitors displaying code that could detect bias in real time across multiple healthcare algorithms simultaneously. You need to see this, I said, turning my laptop around. She read it, her expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief, to something approaching anger. Are they serious? Apparently, good faith, they systemically denied care to vulnerable patients, for profit, and they're calling it good. Tariq looked up from the whiteboard where he'd been sketching out implementation protocols for the state of Maryland's new algorithm transparency requirements. What's happening? Helixion wants to be friends, I said, showing him the email. He read it silently, then shook his head. Corporate Rehabilitation 101, hire a new ethics officer, suggest collaboration with your critics, hope everyone forgets about the criminal indictments. My phone buzzed, text from Noah Reyes, hearing rumors about Helixion rebrand, new name, new leadership, same algorithms, working on a story. I showed them the text. Asha actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. Of course they're rebranding. Classic move. Can't fix the product, so you fix the packaging. The question is what we do about it, Tariq said. Do we respond? Ignore them? Use it as a teaching moment? I walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd spent 2 years trying to get someone to listen, where I'd finally found my voice in a congressional hearing room, where I'd learned the difference between speaking truth and being heard. There's something you should know, I said, turning back to them. This isn't the first olive branch they've extended. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a folder of screenshots I'd been saving. 3 weeks ago, Dr. Hollings, their new ethics officer, reached out through LinkedIn. Very carefully worded, very professional, suggested I might be interested in consulting opportunities with their reformed organization. You didn't mention it, Asha said, because it wasn't worth mentioning. But then last week, I got a call from a headhunter. Amazing opportunity, they said. Chief Technology Ethics Officer at a leading healthcare innovation company, reporting directly to the CEO, 7-figure salary, stock options, the full package. Tariq was already connecting the dots. Let me guess, the mystery company was Helixion. Bing, they want to hire me to legitimize their new image, put the whistleblower on payroll, and suddenly they're the reformed company that learned from their mistakes. I sat back down at the conference table, looking at the email again. The careful language, the suggestion of collaboration, the implication that we were all on the same side now. They think this is a negotiation. They think if they throw enough money at the problem, if they hire the right people and use the right words, everyone will forget what they actually did. Asha was pulling up articles on her laptop. Look at this. Helixion stock is up 12% this week on rumors of strategic restructuring. They're spinning the indictments as a management problem, not a systemic culture problem, and hiring you would complete the narrative, Tariq said. Reformed company, redeemed whistleblower, everyone wins. I thought about Maria Santos, about the insulin coverage that was denied while executives optimized for quarterly profits, about Jennifer Castillo's mother, whose cancer treatment was deemed low priority by an algorithm designed to save money, not lives. They still don't get it. This was never about them, it was never about one company, or one algorithm, or one set of bad decisions. It's about a system that treats healthcare like a commodity and patients like data points. I opened my laptop and started typing a response. Not to Helixion, they didn't deserve the dignity of a reply, but to our newsletter subscribers, to the growing community of patients and advocates, and healthcare workers who'd found each other in the aftermath of the congressional hearing. Subject: Why we don't make deals with the past friends. This morning, I received an email from Helixion Corporation, suggesting that we collaborate on industry-leading standards for algorithmic accountability. They've hired a new ethics officer, rebranded their messaging, and apparently believe that enough time has passed for everyone to forget about the $890 million in fraud that harmed thousands of vulnerable patients. I want to be very clear, Parity Ethics will never collaborate with organizations that have systematically discriminated against patients for profit. We don't work with companies that build bias into code and then hide behind mathematical objectivity. We don't partner with institutions that need external pressure to remember that healthcare is a human right. Instead, we work with the communities that have been harmed by algorithmic discrimination. We build tools with patient advocates who understand the real cost of biased data. We create standards with healthcare workers who see the human face behind every data point. Justice isn't a public relations campaign. Accountability isn't a rebranding exercise, and reform isn't something you can buy by hiring the right consultant. Real change happens when communities have the power to audit the systems that affect their lives, when patients can understand and challenge the algorithms that make decisions about their care, when the people closest to the problem are centered in designing the solution. That's the work we're doing, not with corporations looking to rehabilitate their image, but with the families and communities that corporations have harmed, because healing doesn't happen by making deals with the disease. In solidarity, Lena Ortiz, executive director, Parity Ethics. I read it aloud to Asha and Tariq. When I finished, Asha was grinning. Send it, she said. You sure? It's pretty direct. It's perfect, Tariq said. It draws a clear line between accountability and access, between justice and public relations. I hit send, then closed my laptop. Through the window I could see people walking to work, carrying coffee and checking phones, living their lives in a city where algorithms made invisible decisions about their healthcare, their credit, their employment, their freedom. Most of them had no idea that mathematical equations were shaping their opportunities. They trusted that the systems were fair, that the technology was neutral, that the people building these tools had their best interests at heart. 6 months ago I'd been one of them, trusting the process, filing my reports, believing that good intentions were enough to prevent systemic harm. Now I knew better, and more importantly, I was part of a community that was building something better. My phone buzzed. Text from Jennifer Castillo. Saw your newsletter. Thank you for not forgetting why we started this fight. Another text from a number I didn't recognize. Healthcare worker in Detroit. Using your bias detection tools in our ER. Found discrimination in our triage algorithm. How do we fix it? Another patient advocate in Phoenix. Organizing families affected by AI bias. Can you speak at our event? These were the partnerships that mattered, not with corporations looking to buy forgiveness, but with communities demanding justice. I looked at the Helixion email one more time, then deleted it without a second thought. They could keep their olive branches and their consulting contracts and their 7-figure job offers. I had better work to do. Work that Maria Santos would be proud of. Work that honored Jennifer Castillo's mother. Work that treated patients like people, not data points. Work that couldn't be bought, sold, or rebranded. The rain had stopped, and sunlight was streaming through the warehouse windows, illuminating the whiteboards covered with frameworks and protocols and dreams. Outside, the city hummed with the energy of people building the future. one decision at a time. Inside, we were building something specific. A world where algorithms served human flourishing instead of corporate profit, where patients had power over the systems that governed their care, where justice wasn't a marketing slogan but a mathematical reality. It was hard work, slow work, the kind of change that happened in community meetings and city council hearings and hospital ethics committees, not in corporate boardrooms and congressional hearing chambers, but it was our work, and it was enough. The frame hangs on the wall behind my desk, carefully positioned so every visitor can see it. Not prominently, I'm not that petty, but clearly enough that anyone sitting across from me catches it in their peripheral vision. It's a screenshot of Max Calder's termination email, the one that arrived on my smartwatch while I was testifying before Congress 18 months ago. Below it, in smaller font, "Let her finish the deal, then cut her loose." Underneath that, mounted on brushed steel, the Parity Ethics logo, a simple design that Asha created in our first week, scales of justice rendered in code, algorithm and accountability merged into something new. It's not a trophy. It's a reminder of how far we've come and why we started. Today marks 18 months since that congressional hearing. 18 months since Helixion tried to fire me into silence and accidentally fired me into freedom. I'm sitting in our offices, not the cramped shared workspace in Shaw anymore, but a converted brownstone in DuPont Circle that actually belongs to us, purchased with the Cresty Foundation grant, and 2 subsequent funding rounds that brought our total operating budget to $8.7 million annually. The building buzzes with the kind of purposeful energy that happens when mission-driven people have actual resources to work with. 3 floors of algorithms auditors, policy researchers, community organizers, and patient advocates. 22 full-time staff members, 12 contractors, and a rotating fellowship program that brings healthcare workers and computer scientists together to build tools that serve people instead of profit margins. Lena Ortiz appears in my doorway, holding a tablet and wearing the expression that means either very good news or very complicated news. You need to see this. I gesture to the chair across from my desk. Asha has grown into her role as our chief technology officer, with the confidence of someone who's discovered that her graduate school theories actually work in the real world. Her bias detection algorithms are now used by healthcare systems across 23 states, and her real-time auditing protocols caught discriminatory patterns in AI systems that would have taken traditional oversight methods months to identify. Maryland just announced the results of their first statewide algorithm audit, she says, pulling up a document on her tablet. You remember the requirement we helped write into their Medicaid contract. All AI decision-making systems have to be tested for bias every 6 months. Of course, Maryland had been our pilot state for comprehensive algorithmic accountability, the first place where we'd managed to translate our policy recommendations into actual regulatory requirements. They found bias in 12 different emergency room triage algorithms that under-prioritized Black patients, prescription approval systems that flagged Latino patients as drug-seeking at higher rates, mental health screening tools that classified poverty as a psychiatric risk factor. I felt that familiar mixture of vindication and disgust. Vindication because our tools worked, because the bias we'd predicted was exactly as extensive as we'd feared. Discussed because each biased algorithm represented real people denied care, real families harmed by mathematical discrimination. How bad? Bad enough that the state is requiring complete algorithm replacement for 7 systems. Good enough that they're expanding the audit requirements to all healthcare AI statewide. She paused, scrolling through the document. And they're citing our work as the foundation for the new standards. I walked to the window, looking out at the city where this all began. Somewhere out there, Maria Santos's children were living their lives without their mother, their loss a data point that had helped expose a system built on profitable cruelty. Somewhere else, Jennifer Castillo was organizing other families who'd lost people to algorithmic bias, turning grief into advocacy. And somewhere, hopefully, a patient was receiving care they might have been denied under the old system. A prescription was being approved that might have been flagged as suspicious. A specialist referral was being processed without algorithmic discrimination. There's more, Asha said, 3 more states want to implement Maryland's model, and CMS is considering making algorithmic bias testing a requirement for all federal healthcare contracts. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the agency that oversaw hundreds of billions in federal healthcare spending. If CMS adopted our standards, it would mean algorithmic accountability across the entire federal healthcare system. I sat back down trying to process the scale of what she was describing. That's every Medicare patient, every Medicaid recipient, every federal employee, every military family. Exactly. Which brings me to the complicated part. She set down her tablet and looked at me directly. They want you to testify again. Congressional hearing on the Federal Algorithm Accountability Bill. Senator Cross is leading it, and she specifically requested that you present our policy recommendations. Another hearing. Another chance to sit at that witness table, under those hot lights, speaking truth to power. But this time would be different. This time I wouldn't be a lone voice raising warnings that nobody wanted to hear. This time I'd be representing an organization, a movement, a community of people who'd turned individual courage into collective power. When? Next month. And Lena, she smiled, the kind of smile that suggests she's been saving the best news for last. Tariq's going to testify too, along with 3 patients, whose lives were saved by algorithmic bias detection, and Dr. Patricia Williams from Johns Hopkins, whose team used our protocols to identify discrimination in their cardiac risk assessment algorithms. I thought about that first hearing. How isolated I'd felt walking into that marble chamber. How the weight of carrying the story alone had felt almost unbearable. Now there would be voices to share that weight, experts to validate the science, patients to provide the human face of algorithmic justice. What about Helixion? What about them? I pulled up a news article on my computer, one I'd been tracking for weeks. They're testifying too. New CEO, new ethics officer, new commitment to transparency. They're positioning themselves as the reformed company that learned from their mistake. Asha read over my shoulder, her expression hardening. Reformed company that's still using modified versions of the same algorithms that caused the original problems. Exactly. Which is why this hearing matters. It's not just about policy anymore. It's about narrative, about whether algorithmic accountability becomes a real requirement, or just another corporate talking point. My phone buzzed. Text from Noah Reyes, working on anniversary piece about the hearing. Mind if I ask how it feels to go from fired employee to federal policy architect? I looked around my office, at the framed screenshots and policy recommendations, at the organizational chart showing 22 people whose jobs existed because we'd chosen to build something instead of just criticizing what was broken. Through the door I could see Tariq at a whiteboard, sketching out implementation timelines for bias detection protocols. Down the hall I could hear someone on a call with patient advocates in Phoenix, organizing testimony for a state legislature here. It felt like the opposite of that quiet apartment in Alexandria, where I'd prepared for my first testimony, surrounded by files that told stories no one wanted to hear. It felt like the difference between carrying weight alone and sharing it with people who understood why it mattered. I texted Noah back. It feels like the beginning, because it was. The federal hearing would be important, but it was just one moment in a longer movement. Real change happened in hospital ethics committees, where our protocols were being implemented, in state regulatory agencies that were adopting bias testing requirements, in medical schools where students were learning to question algorithmic assumptions instead of accepting them as neutral, in communities where patients had tools to understand and challenge the AI systems that made decisions about their care. The phone rang. Isabel Ortiz calling from Phoenix, where she'd moved to be closer to my aunt after Papa died. Misha, I saw the news about Maryland. I don't understand all the technical parts, but I understand that families won't lose their mothers the way that poor woman lost hers. Maria Santos. Even now, 18 months later, Ma remembered her name and her story. That's exactly what it means, Ma. Good. That's good work, baby. Your father would be proud. After we hung up, I walked through the office, checking in with teams, reviewing progress reports, listening to the buzz of people building the future one protocol at a time. In the conference room, our policy team was preparing recommendations for the federal hearing. In the lab space, engineers were testing bias detection algorithms on datasets from 12 different healthcare systems. Upstairs, patient advocates were hosting a video call with families affected by algorithmic discrimination, collecting stories that would become testimony. This was what justice looked like when it had resources and community and time to grow, not dramatic confrontations or individual heroism, but systematic work by dedicated people who understood that changing systems required building better systems. At 6 p.m., as the office was winding down, Asha knocked on my door again. One more thing. Personal question. Shoot. Do you ever regret it? Walking away from the corporate world, I mean, you could have stayed quiet, kept your job, retired comfortably in 20 years. I looked at the screenshot on my wall, at Max Calder's words about cutting me loose. Then I looked past Asha to the main office, where Tariq was still at his whiteboard, solving problems that would prevent future Maria Santos from being denied care. Ask me that question differently, I said. Do I regret building this instead of staying silent? Do I regret having a job that matters instead of one that pays well? Do I regret working with people who share my values instead of people who see patients as profit centers? She smiled. When I put it that way, the answer is obvious. They thought firing me would destroy me. Instead, it freed me to build something they could never imagine. I stood up, gathering my files for the evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The federal hearing to prepare for, new states requesting technical assistance, healthcare systems that needed help implementing bias detection protocol. The work would continue because the work was never finished, because algorithmic bias was an ongoing threat that required ongoing vigilance. But tonight, I would go home to my apartment, not the cramped space in Alexandria where I'd prepared my first testimony, but a larger place in Cleveland Park with room for visiting family and friends, walls covered with photos from community organizing events and policy victories, bookshelves filled with volumes on algorithmic justice and healthcare equity. I would make dinner and read reports and maybe call Jennifer Castillo, who was now our West Coast community organizer building coalitions of families affected by AI bias. We would talk about the federal hearing, about strategy and messaging, about the importance of centering patient voices in policy discussion, and then I would sleep the sleep of someone whose work aligns with her values, whose daily efforts serve a cause larger than personal advancement, whose firing from one job had led to creating many jobs for people committed to justice. In the morning, I would wake up and return to this office, to this work, to this community of people building accountability into systems that had operated without oversight for too long. I would continue the work that Maria Santos's death had made urgent, that Jennifer Castillo's loss had made personal, that my own firing had made possible. They'd tried to silence me by taking away my platform. Instead, they'd forced me to build a better one. The screenshot on my wall would stay there, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but as evidence of what I'd gained. Freedom from corporate compliance, freedom to speak truth without fear, freedom to build systems that served human flourishing instead of shareholder value, freedom to transform a moment of professional destruction into a lifetime of meaningful work. That email had said, "Cut her loose." They had no idea they were setting me free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.